Hear the story of the first Easter morning as it is given to us in the Gospel of Mark, the 16th chapter, beginning at the first verse. Hear now God's word. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. This is the word of the Lord. Many years ago, I took a youth group from the congregations that we were serving to the Montreat Youth Conference, a wonderful experience in the summer in the North Carolina mountains. 1,000 high school kids gathered together for a week, and then there are 5 weeks of these conferences. Well, Bunny stayed home to do the hard work. She stayed home to provide for the pastoral care and the needs of our congregations. Well, one evening I got word that she had tried to call me, and so I went to the payphone booth. In those days, before cell phones, I went with my stack of quarters, and I called her on the phone, and after the initial hello, she said, "The social worker just called me. We're being considered for adopting a young girl." Well, I felt the tears well up and then overflow. I couldn't say a word. I was speechless. Now, I'm not often speechless. If you know me, and I suspect a few of you do, you know that I always have a word to say, or two, or three, or four, or more. I was a part of a clergy group that met once a year for professional and personal development, and we had gathered to plan our next meeting and how were we going to spend our time together. We had attended seminars, we'd read books, we'd planned preaching together, we were ready for something fresh. "I know," said one of the members, "let's go for a week of silent retreat to a monastery." There was a lot of enthusiasm for the idea, and then another member of the group said, "Well, we can't do that, it won't work." I said, "Why?" And they all looked at me and laughed. And they said he wouldn't finish out one day. Well, it's true. Speechless. When the women go to the tomb and hear the angel's announcement that Jesus has been raised from the dead, they are speechless. Did you hear how Mark tells the end of the Easter story? So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. But they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The Glaswegian dialect in Scotland has a good word for this experience. They say it's gobsmacked, hit in the chops. They were gobsmacked by what they had seen and what they had heard. In fact, they were gobsmacked by what they didn't see. They didn't see Jesus alive or dead. Yes, the tomb was empty, but where was Jesus? And the angelic figure says, "He's not here. He's gone ahead of you to Galilee. You and all the disciples go there and you will see him." Oh, I tell you, the ending of Mark's gospel is rough and raw. The church has always been uncomfortable with the way Mark's gospel ends, and so the church has found ways to reshape the ending of the gospel. The church over the centuries added other endings to Mark's gospel to smooth it out, to make the resurrection more joyful and triumphant. But the endings, if you look at them and if you have your Pew Bible open, you will see the gospel actually has other things past Mark 16, verse 8. But these other endings seem like bits and pieces cobbled together from other traditions or from some of the other gospels. But scholars from the 4th century to the very present time agree that Mark's gospel ends at this very ragged edge of verse 8. With the scene of the troubled and terrified, silenced women at the tomb. Well, I say let other gospels have their say on Easter morning, and let's hear what Mark has to say. For today, in this frightened, fragmented, and war-torn world, let us hear Mark's witness to the resurrection. The women are speechless. But when you stop and think about it, the way Mark ends his gospel is consistent with the way Mark has told the story from the very beginning. It is a fast-paced, confrontational, stark, rough-hewn story full of irony. The gospel, we're told at the beginning, is about Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, who reveals God's way in the world not through a triumph in Jerusalem, but through death and crucifixion in Jerusalem. It is a gospel about faith and fear and following. It is, above all else, a gospel about discipleship. But throughout the stories, the disciples have their minds stretched, almost exploded, and they still do not understand. They have their faith tested time and again they fail. And now, at this critical moment, in the light of Easter morning, with the angelic announcement of the resurrection of Jesus, the women are gobsmacked, silenced, and they run away in terror, speechless. Dr. Tom Long has written, Mark is not a script for a Miss America contest. For a Miss America contestant who wants to just light one candle in the darkness and leave the world a better place. It is about a God who will not let human deceit and stubbornness and hardness and greed and shallowness thwart the divine will to bring life into a world in which all the candles have been blown out. It is about a kingdom that arrives like a storm, a break-in, a revolution, and places upon each one of us the urgent task of finding ourselves in this new reality. Mark is not about promising human prospects. No, it is about a promising God, a God who makes and keeps promises on the tattered edge of human failings. So here we are this morning on the tattered edge of human failings. Oh, I know we may not have brought spices to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus, but we have brought our fear of death and our even greater fear of life. The damp smell of the moist soil in which we have buried our dreams still clings to our Easter clothing. And we feel the chill that goes up and down our spine when we think that all our hard work may one day end in nothing. We cannot speak the fear in our hearts that death has swallowed up those whom we love forever. And so we come to the empty tomb, forlorn, fearful, speechless. But maybe this is how it should be. For the gospel of Jesus Christ is a word of silence before it is a word of life. The resurrection of Jesus, and therefore our resurrection, is not something that fits easily into the world as we know it. No. It cannot be gleaned from nature. It stands in contrast to the natural world where things decay and die. It is not the same thing as the rebirth of spring, the sprouting of the seed, the emergence of a butterfly. And no philosophy, no human wisdom could ever lead us to the idea of resurrection, no. Resurrection comes from without and invades our world and our way of thinking. It shatters our world and our way of thinking. And yet this resurrection story is the very heart and the foundation of our faith. Frederick Buechner writes that the preacher's task is to tell the truth of the gospel. And then he adds, Before the gospel is a word, it is silence. It is the silence of the congregation's life and the preacher's life. It is life with the sound turned off, so that for a moment you can experience life, not in terms of the world you make it bearable by, but by the unbearable mystery that it is. The resurrection is the unbearable, unutterable mystery. Before it is a word, it is silence, because we do not have the words to explain it. And when we try to explain it, what happens? We end up trying to explain it away, trying to make it fit into the small boxes we've constructed of life, make it can fit and conform to our ways of thinking and doing. Do you remember the Apostle Paul when he wrote to the Galatians? He said that after he encountered the risen Lord on the road to Damascus, what did he do? He went away into the Arabian desert so that he too might experience the mystery with the sound turned off. He too was gobsmacked. But it was this encounter with Jesus that shattered his life and then rebuilt his life. It was 3 years before he even went to Jerusalem to confer with the other disciples. Resurrection collides with our lives, collides with our established ways of thinking and doing, and calls us, invites us into a new way. For we die with Jesus, the gospel says, in order that we might live with him. And all we can do is face the silence and then proclaim the truth and live in its power. This is what the gospel of the empty tomb invites us to do. You see, the resurrection in the gospel story is not in doubt. The tomb is empty. Jesus is gone. Death cannot hold the creative power of God. The angel says that Jesus has gone ahead of them to Galilee, and there he will meet them. Galilee, where it all began. Galilee, where he healed the sick and fed the hungry, where he welcomed the children, where he raised the dead, where he had compassion on the crowds, where he proclaimed the kingdom. It was in Galilee that he called the disciples to faith and to following him. And they are to return to the places where they have been, to the work that they have done, to the people they have known. Only this time they will see Jesus as he truly is. This time, they will let go of the spices of death. They will shake the smell of death from their Easter clothes, and they will live again. And the Lord will meet them in their ordinary lives, their daily labors, in the face of the stranger. One preacher has said, we don't need a travel guide to find out where Galilee is or how to get there. No. Because Galilee is not a place. Galilee is a metaphor. It is a moment in time. Galilee is your life and my life. Galilee is all the places we live. But even more than that, it is all the places where Jesus lives. For there is no place that we can go where Jesus is not present. We leave this Easter service. We go back to Galilee. We go back to our lives. We discover, perhaps for the very first time, the presence of Jesus. For we leave in the power of the resurrection. We go back with fresh eyes to see the world through his eyes. He is always there ahead of us, greeting us in the new situations and the challenges we face, in the situations at school, in every person that we meet. We will meet Jesus in our daily living and in our dying. And in his power, we will not flee from challenges that call for courage, from situations that call for self-sacrifice, for wrongs that demand forgiveness. We will go back and meet the one who renders us speechless and then gives us a new voice, a new word to say. I remember a particular moment of discipleship that was given here some years ago in our church. It was after the sermon. It was a time of witness and testimony. It was given by a very strong, faithful, and talented woman. You may remember it. She began by telling how she had grown up in privilege. She was educated at the best schools, and how she had been given the best of everything. She was married. From the outside, it looked as if she led a charmed life. And then she said, "But I was abused by my husband." And when she told the pastor of her church that she was being abused, he somehow implied it must have been her fault. Well, her marriage ended. She found a new church. She became an outstanding educator. But it was in that moment in time she was witnessing to her new life and offering her help to others who were in abusive situations as well. And when she finished her testimony, there was in this sanctuary a moment of utter silence. And then there was thunderous applause, as if it were the only way we knew how to embrace the truth of her testimony and to support her in her ministry. I believe that God gave not only her, but our church a new voice that day. Yes, there is something startling and frightening and daring about Mark's telling of the Easter story. As a preacher, I'm always tempted to smooth out the rough edges, make it more palatable, land it more softly on our ears, because I'm afraid of the danger of getting caught in one of its splinters. But then I would not be telling the truth. I would not be telling the gospel. For the Easter message is a beautiful promise and a hard demand. For Easter holds within itself the promise of new and resurrected life. But Easter demands that we see the ordinary, everyday moments of our lives through the eyes of the risen Lord. For Jesus is right here in the midst of this sanctuary, in the midst of our people, in the midst of this sometimes messy business we call life. And he silences us. Then he gives us a new word to speak. Amen.